Clara Whitaker cut into her best wheat on a morning when every other farmer in Gray County was praying the grain would hold 3 more days. The field rolled gold to the southern fence, 600 acres of dry Kansas wheat bending under a hard August wind. The heads were full. The stems were brittle. Every pass of that crop carried the weight of a banknote, a broken combine, a sick father, and the Whitaker name fading on the side of the old machine shed. Clara drove her father's tractor slowly across the field, one hand tight on the wheel, the other near the hydraulic lever. Behind her, the disc bit into the wheat and folded it under. Gold disappeared into brown. A strip of bare dirt opened behind the tractor like a wound. By the time she reached the first rise, a pickup had slowed on the county road. Then another. One driver leaned forward over the steering wheel. The second pulled onto the shoulder and let dust drift around his tires. Clara felt their eyes on the back of her neck, but she did not turn. On the tractor seat beside her lay a folded map, yellowed along the creases and soft from years inside a tin box. Red pencil lines crossed the old drawing of Whitaker Farm, not following property boundaries, not matching fence rows, not caring where the wheat was thickest. Clara followed those red lines anyway. At noon, she parked near the ditch and drove red-painted stakes into the ground. One went beside the southern fence, another went near the old lane that had not been used since her childhood, another stood alone in wheat so full it looked almost cruel to cut. Across the road, Mrs. Harlan stood beside her mailbox. She did not wave. She only looked from the stakes to Clara, then back to the wheat. By evening, the south field no longer looked whole. Brown strips ran through the gold like scars. The ditch lay scraped where Clara had dragged away dead grass. Around the propane tank, the ground had been shaved clean. Near the machine shed, she had raked out old leaves, straw, and mouse-chewed feed sacks that had been hiding in the shade for years. The county road carried the news before supper. At the diner, forks paused over chicken-fried steak. At the co-op, a man waiting on twine shook his head at the floor. At the feed store, 2 farmers stopped talking when Clara stepped inside for mower belts. By morning, most of town had heard some version of it. Clara Whitaker was cutting down wheat before harvest. Clara Whitaker was carving up the only crop that could save her. Clara Whitaker had found some old paper in the house and decided it knew more than men who had farmed through 40 summers. She heard pieces of it everywhere. Sometimes just the shape of a sentence stopping when she entered. Sometimes a glance passing between men near the fuel pumps. Sometimes pity, which stung worse than mockery because it came wrapped as kindness. Whitaker Farm had not always looked so tired. When Clara was a girl, the barn roof had been red enough to shine after rain. Her father, Ray Whitaker, could fix almost anything with a crescent wrench, a pocket knife, and patience. Trucks came and went during harvest. Grain dust hung in the yard like weather. Her grandfather's stories lived in every fence post, washout, and cottonwood stump on the place. But the years had thinned it. Her mother had died before Clara finished high school. Wheat prices had fallen the wrong years, and rain had failed the worst ones. The combine grew older, then older still. Ray postponed repairs with the careful optimism of a farmer trying to survive one more season. Then the stroke came in February, sudden and quiet, leaving him alive but changed. Now he sat at the kitchen table most mornings with his right hand curled against his lap. His mug stayed near his left hand. His eyes followed the fields through the window, the way a man might watch a train leaving without him. Clara had come home from a bookkeeping job in Dodge City and never gone back. She learned the loan numbers first, because numbers could not be softened. The operating note was due after harvest. The equipment payment was late. The property taxes had been stretched as far as they would stretch. Mark Ellison at the bank had known the Whitakers for years, which made the conversations harder, not easier. He remembered Clara as a child asleep in a diner booth while her father talked wheat basis and rainfall. He had brought a casserole after her mother's funeral. He was not a villain. He was a man with board members, regulators, and columns of figures that did not care how long a family had loved a piece of land. The farm needed one clean harvest. Not a miracle, not a record. Just enough wheat to cover the note, patch the combine, and keep all 600 acres under the Whitaker name. Every acre mattered. Every bushel mattered. That was why Clara's brown strips looked less like preparation and more like surrender. At the feed store, the air felt heavier than the heat outside. The bell gave its small, tired ring when Clara stepped in, and every conversation near the counter thinned at once. The place smelled of mineral blocks, cracked corn, leather gloves, and diesel carried in on boots. A ceiling fan turned slowly over the seed racks, moving warm air without cooling anything. Clara walked past the fly strips and stacked salt bags with her cap pulled low. She picked out 2 mower belts and carried them to the counter. Behind her, a farmer she had known since childhood folded his arms. He looked at the belts, then out the front window toward the road that led back to Whitaker Farm. Someone near the coffee machine said her father would never have cut good wheat with harvest breathing down his neck. Someone else answered that grief made people do strange things. Clara set the belts on the counter. The clerk checked the tag twice, though it was plain. Clara could feel the men behind her studying her hands, the cracked knuckles, the grease under one thumbnail, the raw place where a blister had opened near her palm. For 1 second, she wanted to turn around and tell them about the map, the red pencil lines, the old lane, the dry draw packed with grass, the cedar branches touching wheat heads through the fence. She wanted to tell them she was not ruining the farm. She was trying to keep the wind from turning it into ash, but the words would have sounded small in that room, so she counted out the money instead. The clerk slid the receipt toward her, then kept 2 fingers on it half a second too long. "Clara," he said, low enough that it sounded private, but not low enough to keep the room from hearing. "You sure you know what you're doing out there?" The question landed harder than laughter. "I'm sure enough to keep working," she said. The clerk's mouth tightened. He glanced toward the window. "Your daddy ever cut wheat before harvest?" The room went still. For a second, the smell of feed and diesel seemed to press closer around her. Her father's curled right hand flashed in her mind, the bank envelopes on the kitchen table, the old map folded on the truck seat outside. "No," she said, "he didn't have to." A chair leg scraped near the coffee machine. The clerk let go of the receipt. Clara took it, tucked it into her shirt pocket, lifted the belts, and turned toward the door. No one blocked her. No one insulted her outright. That was not how people in town did it. They left space just wide enough for a person to walk through, and filled it with judgment after she passed. Outside, sunlight flashed off the windshields in the gravel lot. Clara crossed to her truck without looking back. Only when she opened the door did she see her reflection in the dusty window. Sunburned face, dry lips, eyes too tired for 24. Then she laid the belts beside the old Firebreak map and drove home. The map had been hidden beneath a loose board in the back bedroom closet, inside a tin box with insurance papers, seed tags, and a photograph of her grandfather standing beside a blackened fence line. Clara had been searching for tax records when she found it. At first, she thought the red marks were boundary notes. Then she saw the arrows. South wind, August. Dry draw carries flame. Keep bare before harvest. Do not let wheat meet cedar. The handwriting belonged to Earl Whitaker, her grandfather. Clara knew it from the pencil marks inside the barn door, and the names of calves recorded in an old ledger her father kept but never opened. The map was not a scientific report. It had no county seal, no typed warnings, no fire agency logo. It was a farmer's memory drawn over land he had almost lost. Earl had made it after the 1963 prairie fire. Clara had heard pieces of that story as a child, but only as weathered family legend. A dry storm without rain, lightning west of the county line. A wall of grass fire moving so fast, men abandoned trucks and ran for plowed ground. Earl had saved the house by chance and labor, not luck alone. A bare lane, a grazed patch, and a wet ditch had broken the fire just enough. Afterward, he drew what he had learned so no one after him would have to guess. Then time covered the lesson. More acres went into wheat. Old lanes were plowed under. Cedar trees grew in corners no one cleared. fence rows filled with dry grass. Bigger equipment made every strip of bare land look wasteful. Debt taught farmers to measure the world in harvestable ground. Every unused strip became a question. Every question became a cost. For 2 nights, Clara barely slept. She walked the fields at dawn, with the map in one hand and a notebook in the other. Where Earl had drawn a red line, she found a faint rise under the wheat. Where he had marked a dangerous draw, she found a shallow channel packed with dry kochia and grass. Where he had circled the old lane, she found compacted soil beneath the crop, still firmer than the land around it. Near the southern fence, cedar branches brushed dry wheat heads through the wire. She began seeing the farm differently. The neighbors saw a crop. Clara saw fuel. Mark Ellison came to the farm the following Thursday, after the first 2 brown strips had already been cut through the south wheat. Clara saw his truck before she heard it. It came slowly down the county road, raising a thin tail of dust. He parked near the gate, shut off the engine, and sat there for a moment before opening the door. That pause told Clara more than his face did. She stood beside the tractor with a grease mark across one cheek and a wrench in her back pocket. Behind her, the wheat she had cut under lay in a wide strip of exposed soil. Beyond it, the rest of the field stood gold and full, close enough to harvest that every lost head felt visible. Mark stepped over the low place in the fence wire. Clara watched him notice the broken post, the patched hydraulic hose, the sag in the machine shed roof, and the fuel barrel sitting lower than it should have been. He did not make a show of looking. He simply took it in the way men like him took in numbers. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. From the house, Clara knew her father was watching through the kitchen screen, sitting at the table where the bank envelopes lay under the ceramic bowl. Mark looked across the field, his eyes following the firebreak from the fence to the rise. "How many acres did you take out?" he asked. Clara wiped her palm on her jeans. 14 so far." Mark looked at her. "So far? There are 2 more lines I need to open before the south wind comes back." The wheat moved around them in a dry, whispering wave. Mark lowered his eyes to the bare strip, doing the math without reaching for a calculator. Yield estimate, elevator price, operating note, interest, equipment payment, insurance premium. The arithmetic stood between them as solid as another person. "Clara," he said, 14 acres of good wheat is not a small thing." "I know. And more than 14 is worse." "I know that too." He drew a slow breath and looked toward the house. "The board is going to ask me why a borrower with a late equipment payment is cutting marketable crop into the dirt." Clara kept her voice flat. "What will you tell them?" Mark looked back at the field. "I don't know yet." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Clara turned her gaze toward the south ditch, where dry grass leaned through the fence like yellow hair. "I'm trying to protect the rest of it," she said. Mark followed her eyes. "From what?" Clara almost reached for the map in her pocket. Almost unfolded it between them, but the wind moved through the wheat just then, hard and hot, and the whole field bent toward them like something ready to run. "From what everybody keeps pretending isn't coming," she said. Mark's face changed, but only a little. "Not belief, not yet, more like the first crack in certainty. Your father always found a way to bring in a crop," he said. Clara looked toward the house, where her father's outline had not moved. "My father can't climb onto the combine anymore," she said. "So, I have to find a different way." Mark seemed to realize where his sentence had gone. He looked down at the dust on his shoes, then back at her. "I don't want to see this place sold." Clara believed him. That was the hardest part. If he had sounded eager, she could have hated him. If he had looked smug, she could have used anger like fuel. But he only looked tired. Tired of bad years. Tired of extensions. Tired of sitting across from families whose land had become a file in a cabinet. Tired of pretending kindness could change what an unpaid note eventually required. When he finally turned toward the gate, he stopped beside the leaning post and pressed it upright long enough to latch the wire properly behind him. It was a small gesture, too small to help, too human to ignore. Clara watched his truck disappear down the road. Then she climbed back onto the tractor, unfolded her grandfather's map, and lined the tires with the next red mark. For 3 weeks, she worked the map back into the land. She opened the old lane and cleared the south ditch. She widened the break near the barn and cut a gap between the wheat and the cedar corner. She scraped around fence posts, hauled dead branches, mowed the road shoulder, moved junk metal away from the shed, filled water barrels, checked the pump, and marked places where sparks might jump. The heat held. Each morning came up pale and windless for an hour, then turned restless by 10. The weather radio repeated fire danger warnings until they sounded like a machine talking to itself. The county banned open burning. Ranchers moved cattle from the driest pastures. A small grass fire started west of Mullen Road and was caught before it reached buildings. People talked about it for 2 days, then went back to wheat moisture and diesel prices. Clara did not go back. She worked until her shirt stuck to her spine. The tractor overheated twice. A hydraulic hose split and sprayed oil down the frame. The mower belt snapped on the 4th afternoon, and she sat in the shade of the tractor tire with the broken rubber in her lap, too tired even to curse. At night, she sat across from her father with the bank papers between them. The kitchen smelled of dust, coffee, and old wood. Sometimes Ray tried to speak, and the words tangled. Sometimes he only tapped one finger on the map beside one of Earl's red lines. His eyes said what his mouth could not. Do not stop now. Still, doubt found her. It found her when she saw the yield loss in her notebook. It found her when the banker's truck passed slowly, but did not turn in. It found her when a neighbor cut his wheat clean and close, leaving no ugly brown scar across the field. It found her when she opened the refrigerator and saw half a carton of eggs, a jar of pickles, and nothing that looked like a future. One evening near the end of the 3rd week, Clara stood at the south break while the sun went down red behind smoke from some far-off burn. The wheat on both sides glowed, as if lit from inside. For a moment, the firebreak looked foolish, even to her. Bare dirt. Lost crop. A young woman following the pencil marks of a dead man because she had no better answer. She folded the map and put it in her pocket. Then she walked the line one more time, pulling dry stems that had blown back onto the dirt. The wildfire came 2 days later. It started west of the county line after a dry storm passed without rain. Lightning hit pasture that had not seen green for weeks. At first the smoke rose thin and gray. By 3 o'clock it had thickened into a dark column. By 4, the radio voices had changed. Roads were closing. Volunteer departments were moving east. A dispatcher repeated one location, then corrected herself because the fire had already crossed it. The wind came from the south and west, hard enough to shove dust through the cracks around Clara's kitchen door. Ray stood from his chair before Clara told him to stay inside. He gripped the table with his left hand. His face had gone the color of flour. Clara looked through the window. Far beyond the south field, the sky had turned brown. She moved like the farm had narrowed to a list in her body. Shut off propane, move the grain truck to bare ground, wet the boards near the machine shed, check the pump, close the barn doors, fill the tubs, soak the burlap sacks. Put Ray's medicine by the door, move the pickup where smoke would not trap it. Ash began falling before the flames were visible. Small black flakes landed on Clara's arms, on the hood of the pickup, on the clean ring of dirt around the propane tank. The wheat shivered under the wind. The heads clicked together, dry and restless. Trucks gathered on the county road, but this time they did not slow for gossip. They stopped because no one knew where else to stand. Mrs. Harlan was there with both hands at her throat. 2 farmers from the co-op stood beside a water tank trailer. Mark Ellison's truck pulled in behind them, just another vehicle under a darkening sky. The fire appeared as a low orange line along the far pasture. Then it rose. It ate the ditch grass west of the Harlan place and ran under the fence. It climbed a cedar windbreak in a single rush, turning branches into torches. Sparks lifted ahead of it and scattered across the road. Men shouted and moved back. The wind took their voices apart. When the flames reached Whitaker's southern edge, the wheat caught fast. The sound was not like a campfire or a brush pile. It was a roar with teeth in it. Wheat heads burst, stems snapped, and smoke rolled so thick the house vanished behind Clara for a moment. She could not see the county road. She could not see the trucks. She could only see fire pushing through the outer rows toward the first break. For 10 minutes, everything she had done looked too small. Sparks crossed the bare strip. A patch of stubble flared on the far side. Clara ran at it with a wet sack, boots sinking into loose dirt, smoke burning her throat. She beat the sparks down, missed one, turned back, crushed it under her shovel. More landed near the edge. Her eyes watered until the world blurred orange and black. The main fire hit the first break and hesitated. Not stopped, not defeated. It pressed and searched along the bare ground, hunting for stems, weeds, anything it could climb. Flames licked across dirt where loose straw had blown in, then thinned when they found nothing deeper to feed on. The wind pushed them sideways toward the old lane. Clara stumbled after them. The old lane was wider, scraped down to hard soil. Earl had marked it with 2 red lines and a note Clara knew by heart. "Keep this open when wheat is high." The fire reached it as the sun disappeared behind smoke. There, the wall broke into fingers. Some crossed as sparks, some died in the dirt. One caught a clump of grass Clara had missed near a fence post, and for a terrible few seconds, flame climbed the post and spat embers toward the barn lot. Clara threw water from a 5-gallon bucket until it was empty, then beat the base with the shovel until her arms shook. The second break kept the fire from the machine shed. The ground around it was ugly, bare, and damp from the water she had poured there all afternoon. The flames came close enough to blister paint on a sheet of tin. They blackened the outer fence. They took 3 cedar trees, a line of posts, and the corner of the south field. But when they reached the cleared ring around the propane tank, they had nothing to climb. When they reached the scraped yard, they flattened and moved away. Beyond the Whitaker line, the fire found easier paths. It ran through weeds under fences. It jumped a narrow lane half filled with dry grass. It rolled across stubble and into pasture. Sirens came and went in the smoke. Somewhere east, a shed burned. Somewhere west, cattle bawled from a cut fence. Clara could not track any of it. Her world had become the length of a shovel handle and the next ember. Near midnight, the wind weakened. The fire moved on, slower now, broken by crews, creek bottom, and cooler air. Clara stayed outside until the last orange glow near the south fence had gone dull. Her face was streaked black. Her hair smelled burned. When she stepped into the kitchen, Ray was standing with one hand against the wall. He looked past her through the door. The barn stood. The machine shed stood. Most of the wheat stood. Ray lowered his head, and his shoulders moved once, silently, as if the breath he had been holding for 3 weeks had finally left him. Morning showed what the dark had hidden. The farm was not saved cleanly. No miracle had passed over it. The south edge was black from the ditch to the first rise. Fence posts leaned like burned matchsticks. The old cedar corner was gone. Several acres of wheat had disappeared into ash. The ground around the first break was scarred, where sparks had crossed and nearly found a way. Across the road, the Harlan place had lost more. Farther west, 2 fields were black nearly to the horizon. A machine shed on another farm had collapsed into twisted metal. The county smelled of wet ash, even where no rain had fallen. People came slowly. Not in a parade, not with apologies ready in their mouths. Mrs. Harlan came first, carrying biscuits wrapped in a towel, though her own pasture was still smoking. She stood in the yard and looked at the brown strips through Clara's field for a long time before leaving the pan on the porch. The county agent came with a camera and measuring wheel. He asked before stepping into the field. That was new. He walked the breaks quietly, stopping where the fire had curled and died. He took photographs of the old lane, the scraped ditch, and the charred edge of wheat that had not crossed into the center field. Mark Ellison came later in the week. He brought papers in a plain folder, not a threat, not forgiveness, just the next hard piece of life. The bank still needed payment. The crop loss still mattered. The damaged fence still had to be repaired. The insurance adjuster counted less than Clara hoped. Mark sat at the kitchen table beneath the old map. He did not praise her. He did not suddenly become warm. He looked tired, older than he had in spring. But when he reviewed the note, he found a way to extend part of it. Not erase, not rescue, extend. A narrow strip of breathing room, no wider than a firebreak, but wide enough. Clara signed with a hand that still smelled faintly of smoke. Harvest came late. The combine ran rough, and twice Clara had to shut it down and crawl beneath it with a wrench. The wheat along the burned edge was gone. Smoke had stained some of what remained. The yield was not record-breaking. It was not the kind of crop men bragged about at the elevator. But it was enough to make the required payment, buy fencing supplies, and keep Whitaker Farm from being divided on a courthouse map. That was all Clara asked of it. At the diner, some people changed the subject when she walked in. Some nodded without meeting her eyes. A few still said the fire had turned at the right time, that luck had as much to do with it as her old map. Clara let them keep it. Pride needed somewhere to stand, and she had work to do. But the next August, before the grass cured white along the county roads, 3 farms west of town cut narrow brown lines through their fields. Nobody announced why. Nobody mentioned Clara at the co-op. One farmer called the county agent and asked about safe firebreak widths. Another cleared cedar from a fence corner ignored for 20 years. Mrs. Harlan's grandson scraped the ditch by their south pasture. The idea moved quietly because that was how old wisdom often returned. Not with speeches, not with applause. With a tractor starting before sunrise. With a fence corner cleared when no one was watching. With a farmer giving up a little good crop because he had finally seen what fire could do with too much fuel and too much pride. That winter, Clara framed her grandfather's map and hung it in the kitchen. She did not clean it too much. The stains stayed. The soft creases stayed. Earl Whitaker's red pencil lines stayed exactly as he had drawn them after the first great fire. Beneath the frame, Clara kept her own notebook open, adding dates, wind direction, fuel conditions, burn scars, and every place where her brakes had failed, or nearly failed. Ray sat under the map most mornings, his mug near his left hand, his right still curled, but resting now on the table, instead of hidden in his lap. Some days he managed only a few words, some days none. But when Clara came in from walking the winter wheat, he looked toward the map, then toward her boots, muddy from the same land his father had marked in red pencil. That was enough. Spring softened the burn scars. Green returned first in the low places, then along the edges of the breaks. The south fence stood new and raw against the pasture. Wheat rose again where fire had not reached, and where it had, Clara planted cover to hold the soil until the field was ready. From the rise behind the house, the fire breaks were still visible. They crossed the farm in plain brown lines, not beautiful like wheat, not profitable like full heads at harvest. But Clara had stopped seeing them as wounds. They were seams. They held one season to the next. They held her grandfather's warning to her father's silence. They held her own fear to the morning she chose to keep going anyway. The wildfire had surrounded 600 acres of wheat. It had taken some of it. It had taken fence, cedar, sleep, and whatever innocence Clara still had about how close a farm could come to ending in a single afternoon. But it had not taken the house. It had not taken the barn. It had not taken the Whitaker name from the mailbox. Years later, when younger farmers asked why Clara left bare strips through ground that could have grown grain, she did not tell them she had been right. She did not tell them the town had been wrong. She took down the old map, laid it flat on the kitchen table, and let them see the red lines for themselves. Then she opened her own notebook beside it. Because the legacy was never just 600 acres of wheat. It was knowing when to harvest, and knowing when to sacrifice enough to keep the rest alive.